Skoda Superb, best in next class. Co-powered by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist. Amstrad, get real, get Amstrad.
This pandemic has turned humans into guinea pigs. Human trials are on for 65 vaccines the world over. 11 vaccines are in phase 3, which means they're being tested on thousands of humans. 6 vaccines have got limited approvals, meaning they've been cleared for emergency use. This is what countries like China are doing, injecting untested, unverified vaccines into thousands of people. What does all of this tell you? Vaccine trials are being fast-tracked and human beings are being used to test their efficacy. Vaccines are not about science and health anymore. They're the subject of politics and nationalism. From Bihar to America, political leaders are promising vaccines for votes. But is anyone talking about safety? On Gravitas tonight, we'll discuss how politics may compromise a potential cure for this pandemic. Also on the show, China continues to persecute its 10 million Christians, but that has not stopped the Pope from renewing a power-sharing deal with Beijing. In 1947, on this day, a tribal invasion began in Kashmir. Tonight, we'll revisit the story with a Gravitas ground report. Saudis are boycotting Turkish goods, taking them off supermarket shelves to punish a quote-unquote hostile Turkey. What is this about? We'll tell you. And a soup war reaches the United Nations. 2 countries fighting to declare the soup their national heritage. And it's not the first such fight. We bring you a special report on food and culture wars. But we begin, as always, with Gravitas Global Headlines.
The United States has placed new restrictions on Chinese media firms, designating 6 Chinese media companies as foreign missions. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has said the media companies are substantially owned or effectively controlled by a foreign government, and the decision is aimed at pushing back against communist propaganda. Pompeo said that the government was not placing any restrictions on what the outlets can publish. Thai government has buckled under pressure after a wave of youth-led protests. The Thai PM has revoked emergency after a week of relentless protests, even as Thai protesters gave the Prime Minister Prayuth Chan-o-cha a 3-day deadline to step down or face more demonstrations. A top official from the Indian government has written to Twitter, expressing strong disapproval over misrepresentation of India's map. Twitter had shown the geolocation of Leh and Jammu and Kashmir as a part of China. The Indian government has accused Twitter of not respecting the sovereignty and integrity of the country. Purdue Pharma has pleaded guilty to 3 criminal charges over its production and sale of the prescription opioid, OxyContin, which stoked a nationwide addiction crisis across America. The U.S. drug maker agrees to pay $8.3 billion in fines and damages to settle the criminal case against it. India successfully test-fired anti-tank missile Nag in the western border state of Rajasthan, ending the need for India to import this weapon from either Israel or the United States. Oil tanker FSO Nabarima, containing over 1 million barrels of oil, is now tilting and faces the risk of capsizing in the Gulf of Paria, between the island of Trinidad and the coast of Venezuela, posing an environmental threat to the region. French President Emmanuel Macron paid tribute to school teacher Samuel Paty, who was beheaded last week in Islamist extremist attack, deeming the teacher the face of the Republic. Macron says the future that Islamists want for France will not become a reality because of silent heroes like Paty. Sunni politician Saad al-Hariri has been named Lebanon's new prime minister, after a majority of the country's parliamentarians backed him. Hariri will now be forming a new government to tackle the worst crisis the country has seen since the 1975 to 1990 civil war.
Are you waiting for a vaccine? Well, we all are. It's apparently the only thing that can get us out of this pandemic. But what if it's not safe? What if it comes with side effects? Would you take a vaccine that could make you sick? Probably not. In Brazil, a volunteer who was part of the Oxford vaccine trial has died. In South Korea, 25 people who received a flu shot have died mysteriously. Now, let me be clear from the very beginning. Vaccines have not caused these deaths. But these headlines do spark a scare. They raise questions over the safety of vaccines. Under normal circumstances, scientists follow a long-drawn procedure. They reassess vaccines before giving them to volunteers. But the pandemic does not give us that luxury. Researchers are working at breakneck speed. Leaders of the world want a vaccine and they want it now. So scientists are cutting short their trials. They're conducting simultaneous trials. The question is this: are they compromising on safety? Should a vaccine be fast-tracked? Is politics poisoning vaccine research? Or is science now capable to create vaccines faster? Tonight, we shall try to find answers to these questions because this pandemic has turned humans into guinea pigs. There are multiple trials that are going on all over the world. People like you and me are the lab rats. One volunteer for the Oxford vaccine died today. This happened in Brazil. But the trials for the Oxford vaccine will not stop because the volunteer was never given the vaccine. What he was given was placebo. I know it's confusing. If he was part of the trial, why was he not given the vaccine? Because this is how trials work, apparently. In the third and most advanced stage of trials, thousands of volunteers are given a shot, but only half of them get the vaccine. The other half get some other shot. The results are then compared, and this is to rule out any biases in the study. So this man in Brazil did not get the Oxford vaccine. He was given a pre-existing vaccine for meningitis. The trials will continue. Oxford remains a front-runner in the vaccine race. Until now, 2 vaccine trials have been halted. This includes the Oxford vaccine trials in the UK. Johnson & Johnson had to halt their trials too. This was after some participants fell ill. Both teams resumed their trials after a brief pause. This time they will not halt the trial because it will delay the vaccine further. Scientists are under a lot of pressure to deliver quickly because vaccines are not just about science anymore. They're about politics and nationalism. Look at what the Brazilian president has said. Jair Bolsonaro says Brazil will not buy a Chinese vaccine. It's a good decision because China's vaccine program has been shady. It is giving unproven vaccines to people. Now, Bolsonaro's concern has more to do with his political image than public safety. He does not want to be seen siding with China. So Brazil will not buy the Chinese vaccine. Then we have the case of South Korea. There's panic after 25 people died mysteriously. They were given flu shots. Again, no link between a COVID vaccine and the deaths, but the people of South Korea are worried. The South Korean government is running a program. It is giving flu shots for free to all its citizens. This is to reduce the cases of flu during winter. The symptoms of flu and the symptoms of the Wuhan virus are similar. So a spike in flu cases could overburden the healthcare system of South Korea, and the authorities are hoping to avoid that. But these deaths, 25, could hurt the credibility of the vaccine program. For the moment, the government has refused to suspend the program. What happened in South Korea shows everything that could go wrong with a mass vaccine program. One incident, one mishap, and the entire program's credibility comes into question. This pandemic has made a vaccine a political subject. Look at what India's ruling party, the BJP, has announced today. It has promised free vaccines for the Wuhan virus in its manifesto for the Bihar election. In America, Donald Trump is doing the same. He promised a vaccine before the presidential election. In response, the leader of the American vaccine program has said he would resign if politics is allowed to trump science. So we have vaccines for votes, vaccines for national pride, vaccines for big money. Is anyone talking about safety? Allow me to go back to the questions I started with. What if the vaccine is not safe? What if the vaccine comes with side effects? Would you take a vaccine that could make you sick? Imagine people falling sick after being given a vaccine. The virus is a deadly killer. We don't want a killer vaccine too, which is why it is very important to let scientists lead this process, not political leaders and not vested business interests. In 1796, Edward Jenner, the man who pioneered the concept of vaccines, did something crazy. He injected the deadly smallpox virus and a vaccine into an 8-year-old body. The vaccine worked. So here's a question. Was Edward Jenner efficient or reckless? And this is exactly the question that the world is dealing with now. The hunt for the vaccine is a race against time. We need a vaccine as soon as possible to end this pandemic. But politicians are advancing deadlines, promising vaccines in a matter of months. Are they compromising the very thing that could save us from the virus? Our next story explores.
12 to 18 months. That's the timeline scientists have set to create a Wuhan virus vaccine. If they succeed, it will be a record. Because vaccines usually take 10 years to hit the market. Now we're aiming for 10 months. For perspective, look at how long other vaccines have taken. The polio vaccine took 47 years to reach the market. The chickenpox vaccine took 42 years. The vaccine for Ebola took 43 years. And the hepatitis B vaccine came in 13 years. That was fast by scientific standards. But now the world doesn't want to wait for years. We're talking months and weeks.
Through to Christmas. It may even be bumpy.
Some global leaders have set tight deadlines for scientists. Others haven't even bothered to wait for the scientists. They have pronounced half-baked vaccines as ready for use.
And must be available to everyone.
Donald Trump has promised a vaccine before December.
And we will have 100 million vaccine doses before the end of this year.
Vladimir Putin says he already has one.
As far as I know, this morning for the first time in the world, a vaccine against the new coronavirus was registered.
Some authoritarian governments are cutting corners just to win the vaccine race, like China, which has inoculated 60,000 people with a vaccine that is yet to be approved for mass use. How does China explain this? It says nobody has reported severe adverse reactions. Is that a good enough reason to inject thousands of people with an unproven vaccine? China has turned its citizens into guinea pigs. There is no clarity whether those who took the vaccine were closely monitored or not. Russia was the first to announce a vaccine, the Sputnik V. Experts say that decision was rash. The vaccine was tested on just 76 candidates in the first and second phases. It's too small a sample size to confirm the efficacy of a vaccine. In September, 1 out of 7 volunteers reportedly developed side effects. Earlier this month, India declined a proposal to test the Russian vaccine in large numbers. The Sputnik V will now be tested on 100 candidates first, before a larger trial. The rush for a vaccine is understandable. it seems like the only way to end the pandemic. Governments around the world are cutting blank checks for a vaccine that might work. With this support, scientists have been able to shorten their testing timelines. They are conducting simultaneous trials, but they're also feeling the pressure to roll out a vaccine soon. Add to this the political vaccine race, and the promise of fast-tracking a vaccine turns into peril. Governments like Russia and China have lowered their safety standards just to win the race. The vaccine side effects may go undetected. If the same vaccine becomes a cause of illness, people will lose their trust on the shot altogether. And that could push back the fight against the Wuhan virus by months. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
The world needs a vaccine. The world needs a vaccine that works. The exit strategy of all countries depends on a vaccine, because without a vaccine or a treatment that works, we shall remain trapped in a pandemic spiral. All the major countries of the world that had managed to tame the virus this summer are now battling fresh infections. Their curves are not flat anymore. There's a surge, a second wave. Look at these numbers. Spain and France, both European countries, have now recorded more than 1 million cases. There are curfews across Italy, England and France. The Czech Republic and Belgium have put limits on public drinking. Greece and Switzerland have put in place stricter mask requirements. Essentially, this is the return of the lockdown in Europe. In Argentina, meanwhile, the cases have crossed the 1 million mark. 2 weeks back, Argentina reported the highest positivity rate. Nearly 6 out of 10 citizens were being infected. The New York Times today reported a third surge in America. You heard that right. The third. America is witnessing a third surge in cases. New infections have hit the Midwest and Western America. The report says this could be, and I'm quoting, the worst of the pandemic yet. As of Monday, 16 states added more cases than the previous week. Over the last week, the United States averaged about 59,000 new cases in a day. In India, the number of daily confirmed cases has dropped. But this is not the time to let your guard down. Prime Minister Narendra Modi reiterated this message a few days back. He urged caution ahead of the festival season. Until we find a vaccine, the mask is our best bet. Keep it on and stay safe. Well, that's also the message for the Christians of China. The church seems to have abandoned them. The Vatican has struck a deal with Beijing. They have jointly announced a 2-year extension of a 2018 agreement on the appointment of Chinese bishops, a decision that overlooks the many atrocities that China is inflicting upon its 10 million Christians. Here's a report.
The 1st of October, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo arrives at the Vatican. He is scheduled for an audience with Pope Francis, but the request is declined. The Church says the Pope avoided the meeting in light of the upcoming US elections. But the real reason was something completely different. On the 19th of September, Pompeo shot off this sharply worded letter slamming the Vatican's dealings with China. Mentioned in the letter was an agreement where China recognized some papal authority and gave Pope Francis a say in the appointment of Chinese bishops. This deal was signed in 2018. It was due to expire this month. Pompeo said the Church should not renew it. He cited China's horrific treatment of Christians.
I wrote that piece to honor the moral authority of the Catholic Church and its capacity to influence and make things better for people all across the world. They have historically stood with oppressed peoples all around the world.
It's been just 3 weeks, and what America feared has indeed come true. China and the Vatican have extended the deal by another 2 years.
On the 22nd of October, China and Vatican have decided to extend the accord for the appointment of bishops by 2 years through friendly consultation. The two sides will continue to keep in close communication and consultation, and they will continue to push forward the process of improving relations.
By renewing the deal, the Vatican has completely turned a blind eye to atheist China's human rights violations. It comes despite repeated warnings from underground Chinese priests who have become only more marginalized since it was signed. More than 10 million Christians are said to be living in China. And the Chinese regime has been running a campaign to sinicize their faith. It has removed crosses from buildings and homes, forced churches into installing the Chinese flag, barred minors from attending church services, and is planning to rewrite the Bible itself. This deal renewal will further give China unbridled power. It will provide further legitimacy to China's crimes, and it may just serve as a body blow to the Vatican's already depleting credibility. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
We're not done with the Vatican yet. The Pope renewed a deal with China and he made a staggering announcement. He has become the first pontiff in history to endorse same-sex civil unions, which basically means the Pope has endorsed gay marriage. The endorsement is part of a feature-length documentary which premiered on Wednesday at the Rome Film Festival. The documentary delves into issues that the Pope is said to care about the most: the environment, poverty, migration, racial inequality. Hong Kong is not on the list. Allow me to quote his views on homosexuality. Homosexual people have the right to be in a family. They are children of God. What we have to have is a civil union of law. That way, they're legally covered. Now, interestingly, the Vatican is not too surprised with this endorsement. It says this specific quote was part of the documentary, which is quite old. It has apparently been taken from a 2019 interview to a Mexican broadcaster. Listen to this.
I mean, there is nothing new here because that clip is part of an old interview. It is an abstract inserted in the movie, as the director edited a number of different interviews of the Pope. It is just one among others. In fact, I find it strange that people do not remember it.
Well, your role, the Pope's views are making headlines right now. This is another example of his selective activism. He says gay people are children of God. Sure they are. So are the protesters of Hong Kong and the Christians of China. Just saying. Tensions between Turkey and Saudi Arabia have spilled over into trade. Saudi citizens are boycotting Turkish goods. Saudi supermarkets are taking Turkish products off their shelves. And Riyadh's allies could be following suit. It's a nightmare situation for Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, especially at a time when Turkey is going through an economic slowdown. Our next report tells you more.
Products are disappearing off the shelves in Saudi supermarkets. Coffee, cheese and pickled vine leaves, to name a few. The disappearing goods have one thing in common: a Made in Turkey sticker. Saudi Arabia has imposed an unofficial embargo on Turkey, a campaign led by Saudi businessmen. They are calling for a complete boycott of anything and everything Turkish.
We all have seen and noticed the systematic Turkish hatred against Saudi Arabia and its leadership. It has been ongoing for 3 years in a systematic way that reflects on an apparent hatred against our country and land. Today, it is a normal reaction made by the Saudi people, companies and institutions not to deal with anything Turkish, whether they are imports, investments or tourism.
The response has been staggering. Multiple supermarket chains have joined the campaign. Some are clearing Turkish goods from their shelves. Others plan to keep selling until their stock runs out. Saudi Arabia claims this is a citizen-driven campaign, that the state has nothing to do with it. But Turkey is not buying any of this. It feels the Saudi government is forcing businessmen to boycott Turkish goods. But what about customers? They usually end up being the victims of such trade wars. It is no different in Saudi Arabia. Some customers are unhappy that pocket-friendly options are now off shelves. Others say they will put up national interest first.
I came to the supermarket and avoided all the Turkish products because we have to support the government. We should be all one. I did not buy anything as I passed by it. We have to boycott them.
This boycott could be devastating for Turkey. The campaign is not limited to the kingdom alone. Saudi Arabia has roped in its regional partners. Turkish contractors now face multiple obstacles in West Asia. They are not invited to tenders and sometimes denied visas and permits. The result? Last year, Turkish contractors reported $3 billion losses just from West Asia alone. Turkey's economy has been battered by the coronavirus pandemic. Experts say its currency, the lira, will drop to new lows. A couple of weeks back, we told you that a trade war with Saudi Arabia could mean trouble for Erdogan. Scratch that, because trouble is well and truly here. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
In Nigeria, violent protests continue. Protesters are demanding police reforms. What they're getting instead is more police brutality. Things are spiraling out of control in the city of Lagos. Protesters are being shot and killed. Private property is being torched. All the while, Nigeria's president claims reforms are on the way. But things might soon be out of his hands because this protest has extended beyond his country. It has become a massive global campaign.
This is the Lekki toll booth in Lagos, Nigeria. You've probably never heard of it before. Neither had most of the world until this week. On Monday, Lekki was the site of a mass anti-police protest. Hundreds of people gathered in defiance of a curfew. What followed has been dubbed as the Lekki Massacre. Security forces opened fire on the protesters. Many were killed. But if you ask the Nigerian army, nothing happened on that night. They've dismissed all such reports as fake news. But there is video evidence of the army opening fire. Of protesters running desperately for their lives. Some of them were brave enough to return the next day to tell the world about what happened here.
Now they arrived around 7 when everywhere is dark, so that nobody will know what they're about to do. And we don't have in mind they're about to kill, destroy people, because we've been here for like 2 weeks. So when I'm about to leave, they came and they start shooting up. First of all, when they shoot gun from that step to that target, they now start shooting people. Straight bullet.
In the last couple of days, the protests in Nigeria have taken a violent turn. A TV station was attacked and set on fire by protesters. They believe it is owned by a former governor of Lagos. He has also been linked to the Lekki toll booth attack. The government's messaging and its actions have been contrasting. Nigeria's president is appealing for calm.
Fellow negotiants,
he claims the implementation of reforms is gathering pace.
Recovery of the injured.
But on the streets, the crackdown has been ruthless. Protests against police brutality have been met with more police brutality. Cops were seen tackling protesters to the ground, dragging them through the streets and attacking them mercilessly. Such scenes have triggered global outrage. Police brutality in Nigeria has become a celebrity cause. Pop stars Rihanna and Beyonce, world boxing champion Anthony Joshua, footballers Odion Ighalo and Marcus Rashford. Just some of the big names who have endorsed the protesters. Supporting rallies are being organized in other countries. In London, hundreds of protesters gathered outside Nigeria's High Commission. They were draped in the Nigerian flag and shouting slogans denouncing President Muhammadu Buhari. There were similar scenes in Cape Town, where Nigeria's consulate was surrounded. The episode in Lekki has changed the nature of Nigeria's protests. Africa's largest city is burning. People have become disenchanted with their government. If President Buhari wants to avoid escalation, urgency will be of the essence. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
In 2 days from now, the United Nations will complete 75 years of its existence. But a major row could derail the celebration. Earlier this year, a gag order was issued. United Nations civil servants were barred from participating in public demonstrations. Those orders were subsequently withdrawn, but the controversy has now taken a life of its own. Our next report tells you all about it.
It was on this day, in the year 1945, that the United Nations was born. Delegates from 50 countries gathered in San Francisco. Together, they signed the United Nations Charter and laid the foundation of the world body. Today, 75 years later, those very foundations are being tested by the members of the world body, and even by those who work inside its headquarters in New York. Civil servants of the United Nations are demanding their right to protest. It began early this year. The Black Lives Matter protest in the United States was gathering steam. But UN employees couldn't speak out. According to this report, they were under a gag order. The UN Ethics Office told the personnel to steer clear of public demonstrations, even in their free time. The orders allegedly had the endorsement of UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. But after strong opposition, he changed his stand. Reportedly, a town hall meeting was arranged in June. UN employees were allowed to participate in the protest, but only in their private capacity. Also, they were not allowed to wave the flag of the UN at the protest. But the row didn't end. Even when the Secretary-General gave the go-ahead, staffers at the UN Development Program received a gag order of their own. Neil McCann, an employee at the UNDP office in Brussels, has now filed a complaint against it, calling the ban on employees an abuse of authority. McCann has accused the UNDP ethics chief Peter Liria of trying to muscle UNDP staff standing up against racism. With barely days left for the United Nations Day, the world body finds itself in an awkward spot. The United Nations pushes member countries to promote free speech, expression, and the right of assembly. But as an organization, the UN is restricting its own staff from exercising the same fundamental rights. This situation reflects the larger crisis that the United Nations faces today, the crisis of relevance. The UN completes 75 years of its existence in a year when the world is gripped by a pandemic. In the words of the Secretary-General himself, the pandemic is a clear test of international cooperation, a test that the United Nations has failed. That statement by the Secretary-General to a meeting of the Security Council in September hinted at how helpless the world body is today. There is no doubt that the United Nations needs reforms. The best place to begin is always with itself. Reform, like charity, begins at home. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
The 22nd of October. It's an important but little discussed day in Indian history. It was on this day in 1947 when the first attack on independent India took place, 22nd October. An attack on Kashmir by Pashtun tribesmen mobilized by Pakistan. The attack came to be known as the tribal invasion of Kashmir. It set the precedent for Pakistan's use of non-state actors to foment unrest and strife in the valley. It resulted in the first India-Pakistan War of 1947 and 48, a war which displaced thousands of Kashmiris. More than 73 years have passed, but the wounds of the displaced communities are still fresh. Hoardings have been installed at several locations in Srinagar, calling 22nd October Black Day. Several Kashmiris took to the streets to remind the world of Pakistan's brutalities, which continue to this day. And not just Kashmir, there were protests in several countries and cities, The Hague, Nepal, Japan, Seoul, London, Brussels, Geneva, San Francisco, and there was a car rally in Washington, D.C. So what exactly happened on the 22nd of October? What were the events that unfolded before the invasion took place? WION recently travelled to Uri in northwest Kashmir. Here's a ground report.
This is one of the prettiest regions I've been to anywhere in India, and it's ironic that this place has been a theater of war for one of the longest conflicts in the world. On June 3rd, 1947, the Mountbatten Plan that proposed the end of British suzerainty over India and the partition of the country into India and Pakistan by August 15th, 1947 was approved. The 500 or so recognized princely states in undivided India were given the choice to accede with either India or Pakistan under certain geographical constraints. Kashmir was the only state that shared borders with both countries. Hari Singh, the Dogra king ruler of Jammu and Kashmir, tarried for time and sought what was called standstill agreements with India and Pakistan to ensure continuance of essential goods and services. India did not sign the agreement, but abided by the terms. Pakistan signed the agreement, but violated it by imposing a trade and communications blockade on Kashmir to coerce the state into accession. When that didn't work, an army of Pashtun tribesmen was assembled and sent to infiltrate into Kashmir. Today is the anniversary of the tribal invasion of Kashmir that took place in 1947. Now, I'm standing close to the line of control that lies about 5 kilometers west of the town of Uri in northwest Kashmir. In October 1947, about 5,000 tribesmen, aided by the Pakistan army, raided the town of Muzaffarabad in Kashmir. They then proceeded on this very road towards Uri on a convoy of trucks and lorries. It was this operation that eventually led to the First India-Pakistan War. The story of the tribal invasion is replete with accounts of loot, plunder and destruction wreaked on towns along this road towards Srinagar. Baramulla, in particular, the oldest city in the valley, bore the brunt of the invaders for 13 long days. After Hari Singh signed the letter of accession, Indian troops were airlifted into Srinagar and inflicted a crushing blow to the tribal militia at Shalatang, just on the outskirts of Srinagar. The tribesmen made their way through Uri and through Baramulla and were finally repelled by the Indian army right outside of Srinagar. They then retreated past Uri and onto this very road right here to this mountain. Then an impasse was reached, and eventually a UN-sanctioned ceasefire came into effect. So I'm standing in Kashmir, the line of control is right here, and on the other side is Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. But that is the genesis of the Kashmir conflict. I'm Johan Castell, reporting from Arosa village, near the line of control in Kashmir.
In the United States, the contest between President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden has entered its final chapter. The last presidential debate is set to take place in a few hours from now. American voters may be glued to their TV screens, but Donald Trump is not too excited. There's so many things to be unhappy about. He's unhappy that the debate features a mute button. He's unhappy that foreign affairs is not on the list of topics. And above all, he's unhappy with the choice of moderator for this debate, Kristen Welker of NBC News. In a tweet, Trump said that Welker is terrible and unfair, like most of the fake news reporters. And speaking in Washington, D.C., he said she's biased, and so are her parents. Listen to this.
Well, I think the mute is very unfair, and I think it's very bad that they're not talking about foreign affairs. They're supposed to be talking about foreign affairs, and I think that the anchor is a very biased person. Her parents are very biased, but that's my life. In the meantime, that's the White House standing behind me, right?
What a sport he's being. If the president performs poorly in the debate, you know who to blame. Meanwhile, U.S. national intelligence officials have once again claimed that Russia and Iran are trying to meddle in the election. The announcement was made at a rare and hastily organized news briefing attended by the U.S. intelligence director John Ratcliffe himself. Addressing reporters, Ratcliffe claimed that Tehran and Moscow have already obtained information of several voters, and these voters are apparently being intimidated through threatening emails. The sender is posing as a member of a far-right group called Proud Boys. The emails allegedly read, "We will come after you."
We would like to alert the public that we have identified that 2 foreign actors, Iran and Russia, have taken specific actions to influence public opinion relating to our elections. First, we have confirmed that some voter registration information has been obtained by Iran and separately by Russia. This data can be used by foreign actors to attempt to communicate false information to registered voters that they hope will cause confusion, sow chaos, and undermine your confidence in American democracy.
Also in the headlines is the former Commander-in-Chief of America, Barack Obama. He's hit the campaign trail. He has come to Joe Biden's aid. Biden is taking a break from campaigning to prepare for the debate. Addressing a drive-in rally in Philadelphia, the 44th president vented 4 years of pent-up frustration. He spoke at length about Trump's pandemic response, the income tax scandal, his business deals with China, and his attitude towards the presidency.
I thought Donald Trump would embrace my vision or continue my policies, but I did hope, for the sake of the country, that he might show some interest in taking the job seriously. But it hasn't happened. He hasn't shown any interest in doing the work or helping anybody but himself and his friends, or treating the presidency like a reality show that he can use to get attention. He continues to do business with China because he's got a secret Chinese bank account. How is that possible? How is that possible? A secret Chinese bank account. Listen, can you imagine if I had a secret Chinese bank account when I was running for re-election? You think Fox News might have been a little concerned about that? They would have called me Beijing Barry.
You have to give it to Obama. He's a skilled orator. But it did not work the last time he campaigned for a presidential candidate. Will it work this time? I'll leave you with this statement by the current president.
President Obama is campaigning for Sleepy Joe Biden. And I said, that's good news or bad news? Tell me, are you saying it's good or it's bad? Well, I guess it's bad. No, it's good. There was nobody that campaigned harder for crooked Hillary Clinton than Obama, right? He was all over the place. He said he will not be our president. But before that, he said he will not run. He didn't know me. Then I ran. Then he said he will not get the nomination. Then I got the nomination. Then he said he will not be our president. Then I won. I think the only one more unhappy than crooked Hillary that night was Barack Hussein Obama. The only one. Barack Hussein Obama.
Well, he should win, or news would be no fun without Donald Trump as president. The knives are out in the battle for a soup, meanwhile. Both Russia and Ukraine are claiming a popular Eurasian delicacy as their own. The battle has now gone to the United Nations. While this soup war might seem futile, it is by no means new. Countries can be extremely defensive and sensitive about their cuisine, as this next report will tell you.
Russia and Ukraine are facing off at the United Nations, but not over Crimea or the Donbass rebels. The two countries are in a standoff over a soup. More specifically, this soup, borscht. Ask anyone in the Eurasian belt, and they will tell you that borscht is the perfect comfort food. It is made with beans, carrots, and beets, and served with a dollop of sour cream, a heavenly dish. Now at the center of a political battle. Ukraine claims borscht as its own. It has added the soup to a list of intangible elements of Ukrainian culture. The goal is to declare Ukraine as the home of borscht. For this, it will have to be listed as a UNESCO heritage item. The origin of this campaign is quite interesting. It was led by Yevhen Lopotenko, a celebrity chef based in Kiev. At one expert council meeting, he arrived with 5 liters of borscht, placed the bowl on the table, and said, "We need to recognize this today." But standing in Ukraine's way is Russia. Moscow claims the borscht as part of Russia's national cuisine. It is unlikely to surrender its claim without a fight. Beneath this face-off for a soup is a clash of national identities. Ukraine has long opposed Russia's dominant historical narratives. Moscow often seeks to belittle Ukrainian culture and language, so much so that President Putin once told George Bush that Ukraine is not a country. The cultural fault lines between Ukraine and Russia are not well defined. Both countries were part of the same regime through much of history. But Russia and Ukraine are not the only ones who have fought over a dish. Japan and South Korea once fought over kimchi. Japan designated kimchi as its Atlanta Olympic food in 1996. Seoul petitioned the Food and Agriculture Organization against the move. Then there was the feta cheese fight between Greece and the European Union. Feta is produced using goat's milk in Greece, but Denmark and Germany laid claim to it, even though their feta was produced using cow's milk. Greece ultimately won the battle, and feta was declared a Greek product in 2002. India too has seen multiple culinary battles, both domestic and international. There is an ongoing debate around tandoori delicacies and whether they originated in India or Iran. New Delhi also had to fight the United Kingdom over its favorite chicken tikka masala. The dish was popular in the UK, but when a British minister called it a national dish, the outrage in India was palpable. The list does not end here. Lebanon and Israel still cannot decide who invented hummus. Chile and Peru cannot decide who grew potatoes first. The battle for food is embedded in culture, which explains why countries do not give up that easily. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Why just countries? I'm not sure if West Bengal and Odisha have settled the question of the Rasgulla. On that note, we'll wrap this edition of Gravitas. We're leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.
Fire 6-power engines called the soft landing engines and slow you down to 5 feet per second or about 3.5 miles per hour.
Gravitas. Co-presented by SBI Mutual Fund.